Well, hello. I'm still blinded. So I have my iPhone as the capture device and it's frozen. Wow. I have just got to love it. It has not been having fun today. Let me just go. And I'm going to talk to you from around the back of the computer while I unplug and replug my iPhone because I seem to be struggling with it today. It's being really... Ow, yeah. That was me dropping it, folks. Oh, I don't know what it is doing today. Later. Right. Okay. It's just decided it's going to put on this really bright light into me. And I can't turn it off. I turn flash off. Whatever I do, it doesn't work. Right, is that connected? Can you see something now? Ugh, I have no idea what to do here. Right, this is going to be a fun day, I can tell. Do you know how some days you just think, oh, the IT isn't working. Today is a non-working IT day. I can't stop OBS because if I do that, right, if I delete that, yes, I'm going to delete it. Right, guys, I'm so sorry. Talk amongst yourselves, and hopefully this will come on. Nope, it's not that one. Is there an iOS camera? Add. iOS camera. Okay. iPhone 2. Huh, well, that looks okay. Am I there? Oh, I'm on my screen. This is fun. I can tell that that people are going to find this really... I'm sorry, guys. Right, we've got that one. Let me just... Yeah, okay, let's just get there. Right, so, I'm here. I hope you can all see me. I hope you can all hear me. I have no idea. And I've still got the glaring bright light up here. So for some reason, every time I go into the app that you use with streaming, it turns on automatically my flash. It has never done that before, ever. And I've been spending the last 20 minutes trying to stop it, but I can't work out how to. There just isn't a setting to turn it off, it appears like. So anyway, welcome folks. Welcome if you are in chat already. It's really struggled to read chat because I've got all these like bright shining light streaks across me. But hey, there we go. Right. Ooh, well, everybody's kind of catching up. So first of all, can you see me and can you hear me? Let's hope it's there. Oh, Tamsin says you can. That's great. So welcome folks. Let's just start this again. If you're watching this on catch up, fast forward to now and you'll be fine. Isn't it fun? And I feel really kind of weird looking at myself with this light on. It kind of, you know, gets rid of the wrinkles. It's great. So Norm's saying, drink some water. So folks, welcome to the live stream. And this week we're talking about scale. And I can't look at the camera without being blinded. So normally I'd look at the camera when I'm talking. I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to be looking shifty for the whole... yeah, it really is bright. I'm going to be looking really shifty off to the side all the time. So apologies for that. But I was trying to work out what to talk about this week because, well, you know, we've talked about a lot of things so far over the last however many years, and it is years that I've been doing live streams. And I don't think I necessarily want to go back and cover topics we've already looked at because you can go back and hear me waffle about it on catch up. So I thought, oh, I'll talk about something new, scale. I don't think I've ever spoken about scale before. But as this is a live stream, you know I'm just going to go off on random things. We're probably going to talk about chocolate biscuits and sci-fi at some point. So there we go. But yeah. And Bill, I get it. So everyone who said... welcome in chat. Welcome. I'm sorry, I'm not going to manage some individual names. I think they've all gone past too quickly so far. But I do need to mention 3 names. Timber, Digger and Norman Rowe, who's on there, who are my moderators. If you do something naughty, they will reprimand you. And they'll kick off all those pesky adult chatbots that want us to go ring some number at an exorbitant rate or do something on the internet that will probably do things to our computer we may not want. But I am going to say thank you to Bill for Flash. It blinds every one of us. Because I like that one. And it shows my age that I actually remember watching that. On repeat, obviously, but I remember watching that as a child. So there we go. And Blasted Summer Flange also understood that reference. It's cool. For those of you who don't, it's Flash Gordon. It was the opening line. He'll save every one of us. From the, I think, the black and white cartoon strip. Rather sort of, black and white TV show even, rather than the movie, which had James Bond in it, interestingly, the Timothy Dalton version. So, I actually have done, for this, a PowerPoint. I haven't done a PowerPoint since I left work. Actually, no, I've done a few clinics on PowerPoint, but I don't really use them that much. So, I hope the technology works. We'll see, as nothing else has seemed to work so far, and I'm still blinded by the light. So, Tim was asking how to get rid of scale from the kettle. Well, I get my water from over Worcester way, apparently, even though I live miles away from that. But you can go in the UK and type your postcode in to the water company and it will tell you which wellspring it uses to supply your water. And everyone else in my little village gets Welsh water, but I'm in the section that gets Worcester water that's hard. So apparently it's better for my heart. It's not so good for my kettle or my taps. So in my kettle, I've got like this thing for getting limescale off that's like a little Brillo pad that bounces around and knocks it off. So that's what I use. Timber, oh no, not a PowerPoint. Don't worry, I'm just going to talk a lot. It's just there for something pretty as well. So we've got one down and one up for PowerPoints. Max Musterman, I always have trouble finding out the equivalence between model railway scales like NHO and normal scales like 1 to 72. I will be talking about that. That's one of the things I wanted to clear up. And then we've also got game scales that might be 32 millimetres, which is really, confusing. Oh yes, I remember the Blue Peter presenter, Bill Forrest, is saying Timothy Dalton was in it, and a certain Blue Peter presenter, and we're talking about Flash Gordon, we're back on that. Digger's lucky enough to get some water that's lovely and soft and doesn't get limescale. Timber says he'll get excited if you say I have a spreadsheet. I used to be known as a spreadsheet queen at work, so I have loads of spreadsheets, but I'm not going to inflict them on you. My next spreadsheet that I'm currently working on is a list of what's going in my next Kickstarter. So just a little bit about what's happened in the world of Kathy, because, this is my live stream and presumably you're vaguely interested in it, or you wouldn't have tuned in. My Kickstarter finished on Thursday night, and this was the Galactic Racers Kickstarter, so loads of racers, minis and terrain, and it did really well. I had 210, I think, people back, and it was 8454 by the time we got to the end. So one of my strongest ones yet, and I hope it's going to sort of carry on. I'd like to be able to drop to 3 a year. I'm going to try and do 4 a year this year just to get the money going in to get rid of some of my losses in the company. But and to actually have enough money to pay myself and my bills. But it would be, I'm happy that it did that well. What I really need to do next is just work on my next Kickstarter, but actually have a bit of a break. So I have also this week started to take the supports, because it's FDM with supports, off my B1 battle droid, which is on the spare bed. So I can't currently have visitors because there's a battle droid on my spare bed in pieces. And then I want to put, I'm going to try, it's Liquitex modelling, acrylic modelling paste, or just a bog standard wood filler. Mine happens to be mahogany sandable because it was £4.66 a tub. So the wood filler is a bit cheaper, and people have been using this. In America, everyone uses Bondo, but it huffs. I mean, it stinks to high heaven. And I was trying to find something that was acrylic based because I wanted it to be safer. Now, I'll spray it outside, but the, I've got hours and hours of putting it on and then sanding it off. And realistically, if I was going to put on spray putty, which is what I probably will do over the top, then I want to be able to wet sand. Wet sanding acrylic isn't good, but it keeps the dust down. So I've got a lot of decisions to make about how it all works. But anyway, B1 battle droid incoming, as is a pit droid. But I've got a decision to make because I was going to do them originally as 2 videos, but they're very similar. So I might end up putting them into one video, but then that's, a pit droid, a B1 battle droid, and a folded pit droid. So we'll see. Anyway, what have people been saying? Spreadsheet says stating. Right. Norm, good to hear that. Well deserved. Lots of hard work. Thanks, Norm. Yeah. Blasted summer flange. The trouble is the B1's in pieces and he's actually over the whole bed. So there is no bunking with him because the other side, the pit droids have taken over. So at the moment, there's pit droids and battle droids taking a whole double bed. So Bill Forrest says, Bond, presumably equals polyester body filler. And I've actually, seen it in the US. And I've seen it enough on YouTube to get an understanding that it's probably the same as the Fat Boy epoxy body filler for cars that I tend to use over here. And I have a number of things I don't like about it. Besides the smell, which is the big one, you actually have to mix in, certainly for the one I'm using, a very small blob of hardener into a tin. Now, if you're mixing the whole tin, it's fine, but it goes off so quickly, and I'm only mixing smaller parts. And I do struggle to get the hardener ratio right, I suspect. But it seems quite flexible. It just needs something in it. But I've used that a lot where I needed to sand. So that's cool. But you can't get Bondo in the UK, really. It's just really expensive, which is why I don't want to go down that route as well. I could use the body filler, but again, I actually think it's more expensive than these acrylic putties. And I just feel like acrylic seems better for my health with the dust even than everything else. So there we go. Right. Ooh, wow. So what else have I've still got a Titanfall helmet, which I'm partway through, which I would like to be able to get done. It's decals next. It's got its gloss coat on. I just need to decal it, and I don't have one of the decals, or I don't actually have any of the decals. I need to go find them and do them. So that's something else. And I just also need to do my accounts to file with Companies House, HMRC, the tax accounts. I need to do my own personal tax accounts. This is what holidays are like. I still need to set up the My Mini Factory side of the Kickstarter and get it up there. So my holidays are normally full of doing accounts because I'm sad and I have a company. And I need to do my VAT return this week because it's due in at the end of the month. So yeah. So Bill says that Bondo is a 2-part pea-size harder to golf ball size of filler. It's the same for this epoxy filler I've got, but it's just, I find it hard to work out what a golf ball size bit of filler looks like with the pea-sized hardener when I'm only trying to fill small bits. And also, I find it sets quite quickly. But I saw someone the other day doing, it was a Mando helmet, I think, and she used EVA foam, a thick piece of EVA foam. She was a cosplayer. And she dragged it with that, the wood filler or modelling paste or whatever. And as a result, it kind of smoothed and rounded around the curves a lot better. So I'm going to try using some flexible, even a silicone thing doesn't work, but some kind of flexible spreader, maybe even EVA foam as I have some, to just try, spreading it on with that. So I can get it almost right when it goes on, so I won't have to sand as much. But there is definitely parts that are quite bad that will need a lot of filling and sanding. And for those, a lot of my circles aren't circular because it's supported and it just hasn't printed that well. And I could reprint everything, but I probably won't. And a lot of it is about printing orientation. He prints sort of lengthways along the legs. So the circles, put that in screen, the circles that join into each other, like the sort of, circle twisty bits. This side is where the supports are, is often flat. And he wants it done that way for strength, whereas normally you'd print them this way up for neatness. So yeah. And yeah, Bill, it is very bad to breathe sanding dust. I always wet sand now if I can, but I'm going to be using a mouse and some mechanical things because it is, quite a large thing. It's a full double bed's worth of prints now to sort, and I need to put them together and sort them. So yeah, and I think it just sets too fast for this. An awful lot of people use Bondo thinned with acetone and brush it on. And I'm just like, I'd rather just take it outside and do a coat spray putty, to be honest. So I'll do one sand coat and then a spray putty coat and see what it looks like. But it does get hot. Yeah, and it does set too fast, I think, for what I want. So I'm going to put the PowerPoint presentation on. But I also now, it's got frozen me on, so I just need to, whilst we're going here, yes, I want to remove that. Yes, I'm going to add on an iOS camera. I'm going to add 3. Add existing 3. Okay. Oh, there we go. There's me. And I'm working. So, oops. Hopefully, I managed to get this so that all the pictures are on this side. So there we go. Scale. This is what we're talking about. And it's got my little galactic background, I find. So I'm here to talk scale this week, but as always, if you've got any questions, then pop them up. And actually there's one question I'm just going to do a quick poll for. Now, this was a poll that Blasted Samaflange asked. So I'm going to and I think he wanted to know there we go, 2 question marks, start poll. So anyway, this was a question Blasted Samaflange had. So there we go. If you want to have a look at it, then have a go. He asked that question and it got lost further up, and I could put it in chat, but frankly then I've got to count it up. So I think this is easier. And remind me to finalise it, or you won't be able to see the whatever it is. But yeah, there we go. Looking about equal. No, we're going to tipping towards just build models. I'll let that go on for a bit. So let me just shrink it a bit. Right, there we go. Lee says, thank you for the advice last month on the TV interview. It went really well. I was a candidate in the election. Brilliant. That's really good. Glad it went well. And I hope you did well in the election, whatever it was that you were being elected for. There's quite a lot last week, so, you know, we can guess. Right, so scale. I was thinking a bit about scale and what it means to me, because I am a bit of a scale hussy. I just try them all. I really do. I really have done everything. I think the smallest scales I've got, the Tokyo Tower is this big in something I have. It's a little model. And I've never got any further than just getting the base kit, and I wanted to do a giant creature going through it, and I never did. But I got this little mini building city set that has loads of Tokyo buildings, and you can create some amazing little mini dioramas that I'd seen on YouTube. And like much of what I see on YouTube, I go, I love that. I'll buy it so I can do it. In reality, I should just say to myself, Kathy, look at the picture again. You loved that picture. That was great. You don't need to do it because they have. Anyway, so probably the smallest thing I've done is that. But the largest thing I do is probably 1-to-1 actually, and I will include 1-to-1 in this, and I'll explain why in a minute. So we're going to talk this evening about what is scale. We're going to answer that question, hopefully. So if you've got any question that doesn't make sense, pop it down below in the chat. It might be to the side. What are your choices in scale? What difference does it make when you pick your scale, and how do you pick? And then why does it matter? So I've now got to work out how to get on without losing everything. Here we go. Right. I can move myself so you can actually see that little bit there. Right, there we go. So, what is scale? This is actually my Anakin model I did, and he's not 6 foot. But I want you to imagine that Anakin Skywalker was 6 foot high. Okay, just imagine it, because then the maths will work. If you don't imagine it, the maths doesn't work. So a full-size model would be 6 foot high. So my battle droid is actually about 6'2", 6'3", 6'4", or something. It's about my dad's height. That doesn't help you if you don't know my dad. But if you know my dad, he's tall. So it's about my dad's height. And, you know, if you're doing cosplay, you might do a full-size model. You know, there's a lot of people do props and models now. And cosplay didn't exist when I was a child, But now, I mean, I think in America there's always been dressing up for Halloween. Didn't happen in the UK. I think I went to 2 fancy dress parties in my whole life. Actually, I can only remember one. And not surprisingly, I went as Luke Skywalker. I put on some baggy beige trousers I had, a top, a cream top. I put a belt on it and I had one of those, lightsabers which went in segments inside and you could turn on. And that was fun, yeah. But that was it, and I was like in my early 20s, and that's about the only time I've ever been. But a lot of the techniques you see now, if you want to learn how to mould, how to cast, how to get rid of just normal sort of layer lines and stuff like that. You want to do big weathering for terrain, size things. Then there's a lot of techniques that people are now explaining for cosplay, which are really good and valid and shrink really well to smaller sizes, that you could perhaps consider using them on scale models, probably the larger ones, but you could still use them. So there's definitely a lot to be said for cosplay. I've learned a lot. I mean, I used foam, EVA foam in some of my dioramas, having seen it on a cosplay video when I was in some hotel room traveling, and I got all the books from Kamui Cosplay, and I learned a lot about various different LED things, how to use Arduinos, all sorts of things that they use for effects, smoke, little fog machines. They often come out of cosplay. So it's a really cool thing, and that's full-size models. And then you might also see things like 1 to 48 floating around, and I'm calling it a real scale here. And I'll show you the maths for that in a minute, for the mathematical amongst you. Those of you who wanted spreadsheets, you'll like the maths. And then there's game scales, which are things like 35 mil. And what I should have put on here and didn't is there's railway scales like HO and O and N and Z. And what's worse is they're actually different. They're not all the same. So HO is generally the same, double O is generally the same, but O can have 3 different scales depending which country you live in. That's fun. So, notice this one. Sorry, I'm clicking and it's not going on to the next one. There we go. Right. So let's just talk a little bit about what your choices are for scale. And I'm just going to show you quickly 2 extremes, perhaps. I went to an exhibition called Small is Beautiful in London a couple of years ago, and this is a pencil that someone has carved the lead of. And we've seen matchstick models, where someone takes a matchstick and carves it into palm trees. It's all very excitingly small. And these people that I find are often dentists in real life or something quite meticulous. And they're great for small space modelling. And a pair of visors. Oops, this one I've got to click. Oh, well, okay, that one. Or the other side, I've just talked about this, is cosplay. This is a cosplay that I made. If you've been to my house, this is actually stood on a mannequin. Karen, it is. Or is it Julia? I don't know. I'd have to take them apart to find out. I think it's Julia. I've got 2 mannequins I got from House of Fraser when it went bust, or shut by us. And I've got them with my 2 cosplays on. And my friend who stayed, this was before B1 took over I probably should call him Roger. This is before Roger took over my spare bed. And she said I didn't want to come out in the middle of the night because there's a woman standing on my landing. And she's very pert in all the right places. And so I've clothed her with the 3 pieces of clothing I have for my Titanfall cosplay, and that's the middle one. But this was my Emperor Giorgio, and yes, that is Anson Mount. And so this is really cool. So this is 1-to-1 cosplay, and it was really fun to do something really big for a bit. And I'm going to do some helmets because they are fun, and I feel like they're still models. Okay, right. I'm still clicking the wrong one. It's this one. Right. So we're now on to some of the random bits about scale we're going to talk about. But I'm going to look at chat to see if anyone's come up with any questions. People are saying what 6 foot is. I didn't explain that. Oh, Kathy. Oh, can I go back? Click on here. Can I go back? Yes. I didn't explain it. I didn't do the maths. Oh, so imagine this is a 6 foot high Anakin, or Adika as I called him, which means little one in Mandalorian, just so you know. If we times 6 foot by 12, we get 72 inches. And I can see people have been putting this in the chat, so they're getting ahead of me. Yeah. And then if you times that by 25.4, you get 1828.8 millimeters. I work in millimeters for modelling because I'm doing scale models, obviously. And so for those that said, like stating 6 foot equals 1.8 meters, I might round it down a bit more. And then to do a real scale, like 1 to 48, you have to know that all you do is you divide your millimetres, and I'm modelling in millimetres, which is why I've converted 6 foot to millimetres. I have to divide it by 48 and I get 38.1. So say I have a model that I've downloaded, an STL, and it tells me that it's 1 to 48 scale, but I want 1 to 60th scale. Then the way to translate it is to times by 48. So my model, which is 38.1 millimetres high, I would times it by 48 to make it 1828.8, and then I would divide by 60. So to get between the scales is very simple. You put it back to the full size and then you convert it back down again. And I find these the easiest scales, and to my mind everybody should use these scales because they're really mathematically easy. I can model a 6 foot high person and then I can just divide the scale by 48 and I know it's the right scale for my mini. But somehow nobody thought that was going to work, so they came up with a plethora of names for it and other scale ways of doing it because people found, I don't know if people found maths with an S because I'm British, maths too confusing. People couldn't sell 1 to 48th as well because it was like too many numbers. Or actually they just wanted to create a game where every figure was the same height. And that's where game scales come from, because originally games started out and the game might be 35 millimeters high figures, and a dwarf might be 35 millimeters high, and an orc might be 35 millimeters high, and a knight might be 35 millimeters high. And if you did that, suddenly they were all similar sizes, so that you could, not take too much. They became like chess pieces almost. And if you did it to the top, some of them have got little wispy bits sticking out the top. Knights have got helmets. Where did you measure it to? And the game scales always used to be to eye line. So 35 millimeters was from the floor to the eye line. Now, over the years, people have looked at that and gone, what's 35 millimeter in real scale? Because I want to do a vehicle. And oh look, there's loads of vehicle kits out there, and scale modelling for vehicle kits will say 1 to 48th. It won't say O, it won't say 35 mil, it will say 1 to 48th. And what's happened is there's read across scales where I think 35 mil should actually be about 1 to 47th when you do the maths. And I'm sure someone will point out what it should be. And I think 28 mil figures should probably be about 1 to 59. Because there's loads of stuff in 1 to 48 and there's loads of stuff in 1 to 60 as scales, because somewhere randomly people have picked scales as being more common, I tend to always do my 35 mil as 1 to 48, and I always do my 28 mil as 1 to 60. If maths isn't your thing and you've all just tuned off and gone, this is really boring, don't worry, we'll go back to the scales, the next slides now. But quite simply, to work out what size a model should be, you take the full size and you divide by the big number in the scale. And Tamsin has I was just reading this, said, game scales were at the beginning meant to be solar foot to top of head. The problem was, how do you know where the top of the head is on if they have headgear, so they went soul to eye. So that's, why they've done it. And actually, and then Bill says, and that is my problem with gaming scales. It is, Bill. It's a real problem with gaming scales. And what you find is there's wage inflation. There's scale inflation. Games Workshop used to be 32, well, I think they were 28 mil, but when their 32 mil figures used to be a certain size. And their 32 mil figures are now getting bigger, it seems. People moan about this. I have never done a Games Workshop thing in my life. I have bought one to try to do for a video, what's so great about Games Workshop, but decided it actually really sucked compared to the other models I had, and I'd rather do them first. So, partly because it had skulls everywhere. So what you get is, you get this approximation for gaming scales, but actually it's just, people just make it up. It's almost like different companies have slightly different sizes. But that was the next slide. So let's have a look. We looked at that. There's me with Anson Mount again. Emperor Georgiou, that's the costume. This was at Destination Star Trek in, I don't know, 2019 or something. Yeah. Blasted says, Games Workshop scale has to keep an inflation in line with their prices. Yeah. So let's just have a look. I picked these off the internet, so apologies for not crediting them. And I don't have who did that little pencil, but I did take that photo myself. So these are just to give you an idea. So why does scale matter? Well, first of all, if we looked at the poll, which I'm going to end poll now, so I can talk about it. If we look at the poll, 3/4 of you just build models, and that's fine. But for the 1/4 of you on here who actually play tabletop games with models, this is incredibly important because you need to know what scale. These all look fairly realistic, don't they? They're like 15mm, they're 1:72, which is a good dollhouse. Is a good approximation for some of the model railway scales. But then they're 28mm, which is, I've got a Mantic Dead Zone. I don't know if I've got a Rebel Trooper, but I've got Dead Zone upstairs to make just to try out the terrain and how it plays. And you can see that they're all coming wider and wider, and then you end up with 32mm. Now the two I play most are Star Wars Legion, which is 35mm, and I use 1:48, and Shatterpoint, which is 40mm. Now I've not really done much for Shatterpoint. I just think the stuff for 35 and 40mm actually just is big enough at that point that the doors work, because I'm generally doing the mech size, and I just tend to leave it the same and have slightly smaller buildings in Shatterpoint. But there we go. And Blasted Samouflage says games like Battletech use an even smaller scale at 6mm. So their mechs are yay big at the moment. I was actually, Eon Eagle is out by Philippe from Games Art. And he's got a Kickstarter going at the moment. He was using Battletech minis to show how many could get in his really cute little ship. His ships were featured in my Savannah Spaceport campaign, and he's got a Kickstarter at the moment. So if you haven't gone and looked at it and you want playable spaceships, then do go and have a look at it. So there we go. And Tamsin says the big problem with scales today is that manufacturers wanting to make their scale unique, so you can't mix in figures from other companies. And this is actually one of the problems. I look at it and I think, I understand why Shatterpoint went to 40mm, because they're really fine detail, fine scale minis. You know, their lightsabers are like knitting, sewing needles. They're really fine. Everything's really fine about it. But if you want to get fine detail, the smaller you go, the less detail you get on. And it's more about, you know, you're just putting hundreds of them out. So, yeah. Yeah, a lot of people do 28mm, 32mm or 35mm. So I just tend to say my stuff will cover it all. There we go. But yes, they want to be unique. And Timber says, if I did tabletop, I would use 1/12 scale and crush my enemies. I'm sure you would, Timber. I'm sure you would. You might be a little bit off your base though, and we do use silhouettes for bases. But yeah, Bill agrees with Tamsin. So that's game scales. They are confusing, they are conflicted, they are inflationary, and they're also very much manufacturer specific, and they're annoying. I really hate game scales. We go to what I started with, model railway scales. Now when I started, I thought model railway scales were really, really simple. Now this is an American one. I can tell that because it doesn't mention 00, and it has N at 1:160, which isn't the British one. It has O at 1:48, which isn't the British one. And it has inches as the real size. So what it's saying there is, under O, it says 1:48, 1.25 inches, and that'll presumably be to the foot. So you've got 1.25 inch size model for every foot in reality. Britain does 43.5 because it does 7mm. It says O scale is 7mm, so it says 7mm to the foot, I presume. I don't actually know if it's 7mm to the foot. Someone work the maths out for me, please. And then if you're in France, apparently Google says it's 1:45. So suddenly the things that I thought were really common, like O scale, aren't common. They're actually different depending on country. And the only saving grace to that is you rarely run British, French and American trains all on the same layout, because quite frankly, they don't mix in real life. So you don't put them on there. But there we go. Right, Hulk Smash, says Timber Surf. Indeed, you can buy Marvel Crisis Protocol and do a Hulk Smash. Lee says, are you aware of any open gaming systems? Loads. I swear I found one ages ago where you bought the rules and then bought the figures. I can't for the life of me think what it's called. So any RPG or D&D, realistically, you can use any minis that you want. It's very common. So if you're RPGing, I've got Age of Empire, which is a Star Wars game, and I picked it up. I'm taking it on holiday to read. I meant to take it last time on holiday and forgot. And I just wanted to understand how the terrain works in some of these RPGs, because I don't play them. I tend to play more tabletop miniatures than RPG. And they're all open. A lot of those are generic, and you can get those now all the time on Kickstarter. I've got Space Station Zero, which was self-published. So there's loads of games, but they're not the ones that have movement rules in the same ways as, say, Star Wars Legion. And the reason for that is they are very much based on how far you move. So the bases are the same and are really important. And you have to have those because the whole of the game works is around your miniature base sizes and movement and distance and all that kind of stuff. So they are important. But if you're going down the RPG D&D type route and you want to do sci-fi, you've got Stargrave and loads of them out there. I bought about 5 or 6 books, which I haven't read. You've got Traveller for a start. You know, there are loads of things that are fixed if you want. So Traveller used to be 15mm, but if you want to do it at 28mm, you can. People do now. It moved up. There's nothing about them. The deck plans can all be expanded by printing at a different size. And yeah, so the answer is you probably won't get it with a game like Star Wars Legion, but you will get it with a game like an RPG, like Age of Empire, for example. That blasted Samaflange. I chose to use 40mm for my Combat Tales miniature lines. I'm trying to make a game with smaller mini count, and the larger scale allows for more detail. And that is actually something very noticeable, and I didn't really say it. With game scales, it tends to be when you're fielding whole armies, unless you're Games Workshop, they tend to be smaller scale, like 15mm, because you've got more of them to get on the table. But if you're doing larger ones, like Shatterpoint, there's only maybe 8 models then on each side. Then they tend to be bigger scales to make up for it. Ooh, Tamsin's friend does 1:700 scale WW World War II even naval gaming. So what I find interesting about games as well is something like Armada, which is the fleet game for Star Wars. I don't think the scale's really that consistent because they have to put Venators and X-Wings on the same table. And obviously you can get hundreds of X-Wings or TIE Fighters or whatever it is into one of the big Star Destroyers or Venators or something. So, they just don't conflate. So there are games that tend to just scrunch everything, and that's where game scales, I guess, work. Bill says, diorama-wise, good use of scale allows for some awesome force perspective. That is very true. That is a really good point. John, thank you, John. And Bracken is his dog, in case it's not actually his dad's dog. Bracken, who we meet most lunchtimes. Trisha asked if we were going to see you at lunchtime today, but we walked early because we have visitors. So I said, no, he won't be out. She always says, is your friend with the dog here? John, every time we go for a walk, is your friend with the dog here? One-page rules. Yes, they do a lot of miniature agnostic, they're called. So it doesn't matter what the miniatures are. Yeah, I keep seeing it coming up with the buffering, and I don't know why, because I've actually shut down all my programs that normally use internet, so I'm not quite sure what it is. Timber says, ironically, British O is 7mm, but half O, which is American, 3.5mm is American. Yeah, I get very confused about people doing the these choices. And Blasted Samouflage has also come back with one-page rules, has miniature agnostic rules, Grimdark Firefighters, Warhammer 40k. So there we go. Oh, and Bill says, and Lima O is 1 to 45. That must have come because Lima was Italian, wasn't it? So it must be not just France that has it, but other places. I've bought... Sorry, I'll read the comment. That Blasted Samouflage says, Space Station Zero is great. I've bought it, but I've not played it. My problem is, I don't actually have anyone to play games with. I can go to my local shop and do Legion and maybe Shatterpoint if I put out. But nobody actually plays RPGs. And I don't have any friends that play them locally. So I need to probably... I'd like to try one and at least play one and have a go. But anyway. Fez Hopkins, my minis aren't really minis at 1/6, but I like 1/6. It's easier to do and see details, at least for me. I'm going to get to 1/6 in a minute because it's one of my favourite scales. Tamsin says, as an addendum, that's with cruisers and battleships, not little MTBs. The games need very big tables or floors. Yeah, I can imagine. She's talking about the Naval World War II one. You know, obviously you can't. Yeah, you do need quite big tables. I have a problem. I don't have a 6 foot long table here. Yeah, we were home by 12, John. So yeah, you might have been early, but I think you're early enough. Lee says, oh, Kathy, would you organise a meetup? Yeah, I don't actually know where anyone lives. I go to my local shop and I'd go there quite happily and play people RPGs. And I may actually put on there that I have Age of Empire and I'd like to get some people to play it and see if anyone does. But yeah, Blasted Space Station Zero is primarily by yourself, solo gaming for the win. I'm going to have to try it then. Do I need minis for it and everything? I might take them on holiday. I might take it on holiday and read it. Ravison Express says, something's wrong. G-scale is 1 to 22.5. Aha! No, it isn't. G-scale, or garden scale, is a range, just like O. So you can have 1 to 25, but 1 to 22.5. So 1 to 25 is American, 1 to 22.5 is European. And I think there's a few other scales that people like. I think 1 to 32 and 1 to 32 also slips into G-scale sometimes. So this is the trouble. This is why I like rescale. I like to know that HO is 1 to 87.5 and I'll use the 0.5 generally. Or O scale is 1 to 48 or... I believe you. LGB's European though, isn't it? So I think Americans do it differently. That's all, Ravenson. Yeah. And Norma says 3.75 inch figures work well with G-scale. That's another thing. A 3.75 inch figure. We've been talking 35 mil, but actually those are more action figures, and I haven't really mentioned them. But if you're doing dioramas, you'll often be using action figures, and then they will often be talking about 3.7 inch, 6 inch, 12 inch figures. And a 12 inch figure is about 6 scale. So obviously 6 foot divided by 6, 12 inch. So, and 6 inch figures are Black Series. So if you're doing some dioramas and you're using action figures, you'll see a different set like 3.75. That Blasted Samouflage, yes, for miniatures, Station Zero, but it's agnostic, so you can use what you like. Most of the book are missions, so don't read ahead. Okay, I won't. I think I read the opening bit and then thought I need to do this properly. Timbersurf, G-scale is not a scale, it's actually a gauge, so many scales on the same track. Thanks, Timber. And for those that just lost that, scale and gauge. So scale is 1 to 48. O scale might be 1 to 48 or 1 to 43.5 or 1 to 45, but they all run on the same gauge, and that's the difference between the rail centres, the same gauge track. And remind me for O, is it 16.5 millimetres? Did I just make that up totally? So it's the same width across on the track, and they all run. And that's why double O and HO actually run on the same track. But double O is automatically, its wheels are slightly narrow gauged. And that was a decision by the manufacturers to get it to go around tighter corners. So there we go. Right, that Blasted Samurai, 3.75 inches would be G.I. Joe characters from the 80s line. There's loads of 3.75 inches if you go to Amazon, which I may do looking at figures. So Ravenson says G is 11 metres or 2 metres. Okay. Space Station Zero looks good. Oh, we've recommended a game then for everybody. So Bill Forrest says, I always assumed G was 1 to 32. No. 1 to 22.5 is the most common one I've seen around here. But I've been to Friends Garden Railways, and they've got 3 manufacturers, and each manufacturer is different. So, yeah. Too complex. They're like game scales, but for model railway people, just so we can be really confusing on scale. Roman 2, thank you, Raverson. So 2 meters. O is 16.5 just to mess. Oh, okay. And Stating the Obvious has done O 16.5 just to mess with everyone. There are people who are running O scale on 16.5 millimeter track, and they've gone, well, actually, if the track is 16.5 millimeters across and an actual track is 4 foot 8.5 inches across, then this is the actual scale, and they do it all to that scale, and they do it as per the prototype. Okay, and we're not going to mention narrow gauge, except to say the 009 is 00 scale, so it's 1 to 76 on 9 millimeter track, which is narrow gauge because the normal track is bigger than that. There we go. Right, let's move on. So we've now discovered when it comes to scale, gaming scales are confusing. They're very confusing. Railway scales are also confusing, especially if you're going to buy overseas stuff. And as we become more global, people might buy more kits from overseas. They might buy more 3D print kits and not realise that the American O-scale kit they bought for a generic warehouse isn't actually the same scale as they're modelling in the UK. And it is quite different. You notice it on people the most, I think. So now we're going to talk about another reason why your size, and these are where they're already set. So you're modelling O-scale because you've got O-scale, it's set. You can't change that. If you want to model an O-scale railway, your railway is always going to be O-scale. You know, it's always going to be the same scale. You can't change it just because, unlike a diorama where you can go, oh, this week I fancy doing something more detailed and change it. You're going to be locked into the scale for a long time. One of the things that, though, quite often we just buy kits. I don't know about you, I've got cupboards full of kits. I've got kits for games, and I've got a lot of Gunpla kits that I went through a phase of buying them and haven't built any really. I built 2 at the moment. And I've got loads more than that to build, honestly. And they have loads of different sizes there. And they have RG, real grade, HG, high grade Gundam, and they're 1 to 144, which roughly works out about N scale, especially if you're British, I think. They've got Master grade, and they're about 1 to 100, which actually is a common scale, but not in scale modelling. And then PG, which is 1 to 60. Again, not that common in other scale models, but at least a nice round one, and not far off 28mm if you're doing gaming scales. So, you know, it might be that you want to buy a model car kit. There are about 2 scales that model car kits come in. They seem to be 1 to 32 and 1 to 24. And those seem to be the scales. So if you want to do a nice model car kit, the chances are you're going to end up in one of those scales because that is what the box is. And right back up here, I saw somebody, okay, it's miles back up here. Dan's Model Railroading Journey. My mother sells fine dollhouse miniatures, handmade type of stuff that's 1/12 scale. The artists that produce that stuff at that scale are amazing. And, you know, the stuff you get for dolls' houses is just stunning. You know, stunningly beautiful. Everything from crystal chandeliers through to, you know, baked jam tarts or whatever in between, plus all the clothing and everything. And they're generally 1/12 or 1/24, I think, because they want to get a house in. It's a doll's house, but they want it to be big enough you can see stuff. So they've gone bigger scale. If you want to do doll's houses and use bought stuff, you're going to be working in those scales because those are where all your common materials are. Right, back to chat. Ravenson Express. LGB invented the G gauge or G scale in 1968. G means garden because it was for indoor and outdoor use. Yes. Yep, I did say garden scale. I knew that bit. That's cool. I know stuff. So 2 or 2 is for the scale, 1 to 22.5, and meters means the original had 1 meter gauge. Right, so it's 2 for the scale, 1 meter gauge. Okay. That blasted camouflage says game railway scales are like the points. Whose line is it anyway? They're made up and don't matter. I really think they do. And then Ravenson's back to crazy because 1 metre gauge, because the first loco was from Stained from Austria, and that's a 760 millimetre gauge in reality. Yeah. So Lee says, what's the smallest railway scale that you think is practical? I fancy Z scale, but no doubt would be too fiddly. I've actually seen Z scale, and I think it runs a lot better now than it did. So I think Z. There's also T scale and what was the one that Hornby just brought out? That was halfway between HO and M, wasn't it, or TT or whatever. I think it depends what you want, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So, why does size matter? Space. Space, that final frontier. These are some of my storage areas for my dioramas. I don't currently have a layout. Tim has my last layout, and he's well, he was going up a Welsh mountain, so I don't think I've seen him on the stream. Have I? Sorry if I didn't see you, Tim. But, you know, this is just where I've got stuff. I've got dioramas, I've got storage dioramas that haven't been sorted yet. I've just got dioramas, as you can see. So the biggest reason for me for choosing scale is what I want to do with it. But actually, the most constraining reason for me is space. If I want to do a railway now, I would always do narrow gauge so that I can get more in, because narrow gauge stock is smaller than mainline stock. So it's smaller and you can fit more of it in. Just generally, I would say if you want to do a railway, you've got a choice. You can do N or Z, big rolling landscapes, long trains running through them. Or you could go up to G and do an industrial warehouse with one loco and a couple of wagons in the same space and a building, and that'll be about it. So you can choose your scale and how you focus depending in the same space. Like N scale, I want to do a whole countryside in there. G, I actually just want to do really detailed grotty industrial. But actually at some point it does come down to how much space you have left. And if you love 6 scale, and if you love doing big dioramas, at some point, like me, you're going to run out of space. And then it's like, what do you do with them all? So my biggest problem at the moment is Kickstarter terrain. I mean, every space is full now with 3D prints I've designed just in the last year, and I've only been doing it a year and a half, and I just dread where it's all going to go. But local game shop will probably do well at some point. So space to me is the biggest problem. Okay, so Ravenson, T-scale is very tiny, it's 1 to 480 or roundabout. And then also says, sorry Tabo, Stains 2, not Stained. Very cute little narrow gauge loco. I do love narrow gauge. So TT, 1 to 120, I think, from Hornby. So that's on the smaller size. Miniature engineering scales are 3, 2, 1, 0, then 00, etc. So we've got another set of gauges, sorry. So we've got another set there. Timber says T is 1 to 450, but some do 1 to 480 because we wouldn't like it all to be the same. And as Ravenson Express says, there's always somebody that breaks the rules. Timber says TT was originally 1 to 100. Hornby introduced TT 120 as it's actually the correct scale for the track gauge. This is the problem, 00 was under. Dual 21, why did the 1/10th scale model break up with the 1/64th scale model? Oh, because they just couldn't see eye to eye. Oh, I'm with you stating that's definitely an ouch. So one of the defining matters on scale can often be just how big a size. If you want to do a massive diorama, sometimes, the spaceship, a space station, a big subject, you want to do a destroyer, like World War II destroyers that 1 to 700 earlier that Tamsin was talking about. You literally can't fit them in your bedroom if you do them at 1 to 48. But if you do them at 1 to 700, you can, but then you lose the ability to detail them. And so there's what appeals to you most? So for me, I scale to fit my detail level. This is how I choose my scale, and everyone's different. I find N-scale locos too fiddly. I found 009 quite fiddly. I like 00 because I can still paint people, and I can, do stuff generally at that size. So on the left, I'm going to just move myself out of the way for a second. So on the left, we have, this is Treadwell. This is my Threadwell diorama plugged into my then model railway. This is HO, so it's 1 to 87th, 3.5 mil to the foot, and you can see that's a bed car, so that's the equivalent of a railway carriage. And you can see the windows, This is the kind of size. There's no people in here to sort of size it out by, but you can see there's a lot of size. So definitely a lot of room on this one, on the left, to get scenery in. And this is what this is. This is scenery. This is my rubber water. I loved this one. It's in a cupboard at the moment. On the right is one of my favourite dioramas I've ever done. The annoying speed bike has now fallen off its mount, so I need to fix it. And the trooper heads bobble like mad. They're like bobbleheads whenever anyone walks in the room. But it's one of my favourite dioramas. And this is 6 scale. It's one of my favourite scales. I love this scale. I rarely do it because that is actually longer than the Threadwell. It's not as tall, but it's longer. It's on my metre wide bookshelf. So it's it's 3 foot long, basically this. I love it. I absolutely adored it. I could put more detail in. I could do a lot more. This was already a fairly big build. I had Mando, who was one video, and then the second video was the background. Absolutely adored doing this. Definitely one of the favourite things I've ever done. Is a 3D print for Mando, and the rest of it is, and for the speeder bike, and the rest of it is mostly just sand and tar grout. I loved it, but I can't do too many of them because I'm out of space for 3 foot long dioramas. Now I could just take Mando on his own, but I love the diorama. I like doing scenery. And for me, what I like about larger scales, like the right one, and the reason I love this so much is you can do the details. I can put the hair on Grogu. You know, I can weather up his armour on Mando really well. I love it. I really do. I love the scale. Those Stormtrooper helmets, really great scaling on them to do modelling. Just everything about it is a scale I love to work at, that level of detail. But smaller scales are better for scenery. If you want to do whole dioramas which have a whole scene in of like greenery and big and trees especially. You think Mando on the right, on the left-hand picture, wouldn't even be a quarter of the way up that tree. He probably wouldn't even come much above the bushes, to be honest, because these are quite tall bushes by the time you look here. So think of those as incredibly tall bramble bushes. So he would be lost in this scene. So to me, I always choose my scale for what it is that I'm modelling. Let me put you back down here. And let me put that back down there. Ooh. Another thing, and this is one of the things that I think really defines what scale I'm modelling in more than anything else, and that is size of detail and the material I want to model it in. So grab a Tim, you joined us. I just mentioned that I hadn't seen you on a second ago. Tim's been up a Welsh mountain. Poor excuse, I think, but you know, hey, these things happen. Ravenson Express, I loved watching you make the waterfall diorama. It's really amazing. Thank you. It was actually years in the making because I'd started it years earlier and then finished it off for the waterfall. It was really good. Oh, and Ravenson Express says, by the way, I put a picture with the stains too to Discord in my Livestream folder. I won't try and look at it now because that will probably just completely confuse me as to where all my windows are for everything. But thank you. And if you're not on my Discord, hopefully one of the moderators will put a link on so you can join it. So that's great. Yeah. So that Blasted Summerflange says, I think choosing scale for modelling is a big factor. From a gaming perspective, you want large, stompy robots on a table versus a 5-person skirmish firefight, you'd use very different scales. I think it's true, and you can see that by the choices that the model manufacturers make as well, as to more detailed models generally are in bigger scales, and more sort of armies and stuff are in smaller. So this, one of these is FDM and one of them is resin. And FDM modelling has got much, much better. Thank you, Timber, for putting up the link. That's to my Discord if you want to see that picture that Ravenson has put up. So one of the things that you might choose, if you want to do loads of small miniatures for gaming, you're not really going to choose FDM because they're never going to look good and it's just, they're going to suck. If you want to, do big terrain prints, you're probably going to do them in FDM. But most people will choose, if you want to 3D print something and it's full of etched mesh, etc., you're going to struggle because it just gets too delicate for the sort of resin, and you want to be with a photo edge. So sometimes your build materials will choose. You might go, actually, this is below the resolution of a resin printer. You've only got an FDM printer and it can't print that small. And so you're going to have to do an awful lot of sort of scratch building bits that are missing from the FDM. So it might be when you come to do a diorama, your build materials, what you're using, are you doing it from styrene? Do you want to kit bash out of a kit? Do you want to do resin printing? Do you want to do FDM printing? Do you want to laser cut? That might define the scale just by the resolution of those particular materials. Resin printers will print incredibly finely, but it may not be robust enough to use. So you'll have to think, what is it that I actually want to build this out of as well before you set your scale. Little Britain, good day from Southern Ontario. I choose 00 for my layout that I've been collecting for over the last 4 years. If I'd known, I might have chosen TT120. I don't think there's a lot of stock in TT120 at the moment, so I think 00 probably has more variety, I think. So I don't think you've made a bad decision, but yeah, I can see why it's it's kind of a halfway scale. I really like S scale. So O scale is my favourite scale, almost 1:48, which is 35mm, which is actually what I'm modelling for Legion. So it's starting to be definitely the scale I'm modelling. And I like it because the figures are achievable in that scale. I can paint them and they look okay. They're big enough that I can do detail on them. But it's small enough that it still fits in. So my diorama over here, my Dagobah is 1:48. It's a scale I really love. And it's great. I love 1:48. And it's O scale for us. But actually, if I was doing a railway and I wanted big scale, I probably would stick with S, which is a very American scale. But 1:64, which is halfway between 00 and O, you get that. Or I do ON30, which I did have loads of at one point. And ON30 is narrow gauge, so they're smaller engines, but in O, so you've got the detail. And I really loved ON30. So there we go. That's the scale I'd pick. I had so much ON30 stuff. I'm never getting back into it because I had thousands of pounds worth of it and I sold it all years ago because I stayed with my HO, and I kind of wish I'd gone to ON30 at that point, but there we go. Anyway, hi Graham, welcome aboard. And happy birthday. And it was birthday yesterday. Little Bryn says, I like my trains long, which means long platforms, etc., etc. Yeah, you need a lot of scale. You need a lot of space to do railways of certain types. Timber's saying, check out Charlie on Partick Hill Station YouTube. He's also in Ontario and does UHOO. Oh, there we go. Right. So anyway, that was a minor point. And then this is also another part about build materials. If you're going to, there's a reason I mentioned this before with dolls' houses. If you're going to do anything with people in, I would not, whether they're the main model, where you are doing an action figure type of size of person, you could do 3.75, but I wouldn't go smaller. I prefer to do them in 6. I might push down to a 12th. But realistically, these are 6 scale figures. This is a big diorama. It's almost as big as my TV. And it's on the floor beneath the TV. I love this diorama, but it's massive and it just sits on the floor in the lounge because I've nowhere else to put it. And these are Dogmill Snow 1/6 scale figures. If you don't know Dogmill Snow, He's stunning. If you type 1/6 scale figure, he is practically every other result you'll get. He just does the most beautiful, grungy. These are actually from his fantasy, which he hasn't done that much of. He normally does sci-fi, and I've got a couple of his Hanroku. Oh, I bought one ages ago. Troopers, and a one of his matted hair women. Kind of futuristic, grungy scavenger type sci-fi. I love his stuff. He is so gifted. He just is so gifted. And, his figures are not expensive for the work that he puts into them. I do love them. I just obviously can't afford them now. I actually make stuff, but I've still bought his because I love them so much. This is a diorama I did to go with these figures that I got from him. The lady at the top has hair across her face because she's actually blind. And the reason I wanted to bring these up is the material that he has on them, the drapes that you get. It's really hard to get that real hair, all of that sort of thing in anything less than a 6th scale. And I've seen some really great maquettes at 4th scale or quarter scale and half scale for people who want to do big figures, where the figure is practically the sculpture. I do find clothing looks better in larger scale if you're going to do it with fabric and actually sew it. Now I see some great 12th scale, which is 6-inch high figures. The other thing is the tree here, which is a really twisted tree, is bits of wire with celluclay put on by hand over the wire. And there's no way I'd have done that on a smaller scale. It would always have been about this thick, the tree. And the reason is just the celluclay blobs at a certain amount, and it wasn't going to blob any smaller than that. So, because it's kind of made of bits of paper mache. It's like a paper mache version, but all shredded cellulose bits. And sometimes you see a bit of recycling, but it's just shredded in a way that there's pulp in there, that it won't go any smaller than that. So this was probably the smallest scale I'd actually get away with doing that technique in. And then I just wanted to use an example here of, this is I think the final slide, between weathering. So let me move myself out the way. Right. So what we have here is a 15mm Severna spaceport, my original diorama that inspired the Kickstarter. This is a 15mm, and I'm not being funny, it's actually about this big. So this is not a small diorama, and I haven't got it together because it's just so big. There's like part on the floor, it's the size of my fireplace. There's a bit behind the sofa and it's the size of the armchair. So there's a lot to it, and actually I wasn't overly happy with some of it by the end. And some of it's warped because I did it with a resin that warps a lot. So some of the resin stuff's all just warped off. But anyway, it looked good at the time. And it all lights up and it's really cool and great. And that is 15mm. And I went to town still on the scuffing, but there's a point when you get to 15mm where weathering is not that obvious as a chip or a scuff, because it just isn't, because you just don't see it. It becomes part of an overall just loss. So I couldn't do streaks on the siding being too big, or they're just wrong for the scale. It would be like going down the road and the streak on the concrete motorway overpass, whatever you want to call it, bridge, or the concrete building is 2 foot wide. Streaks aren't 2 foot wide. Streaks are finer than that. So it's 15mm, I've weathered it, but when I look across the top of Severna Spaceport, that's why I put this picture, you can see across the top there's some streaking. They're like, you can see at the bottom of the figure there's a mech there that's a big mech. They're almost as big as the arm of the mech. It's just out of scale. So, and I was in a rush and I just streaked it, and it's some kind of enamel streaking grime of some sort probably. It's just too big. On the right, you can see that in this level, it's highly detailed. This is a 1:48, so it's O scale, whereas the other one at 15mm is about 1/100, so it's about half the size. This one here, 1:48, because it's American O, I've put real rust on there, and that's actual rust in a solution that you then put a glue solution, and then you put a rusting solution on and it puffs up. I think at 1 to 48 it's still a little bit big and grainy. I like it a lot, but I find it's just a little bit big and grainy. And this is one of the problems. You have techniques, you have weathering and things like this, and actually you have to get them in right for the scale, or they just look slightly not quite right. And your eye is going, yeah, this is weathered, but it's also going, but that weathering's too big. Too big. Woo! And we're there. So let's go back to me. There we go. So that's what I wanted to say, really, about scale. So let's see what's in chat. Okay, UK. I did wonder what UH was. Thank you for that. Stating the obvious, you can always re-gauge your 00 to P4 or EM. Or you couldn't. They're just trying to... 00 is not the right scale for the track gauge. So P4 and EM are people who are trying to get the right scale and gauge, so the gauges change and stuff like that. But yeah. Little Britain does follow Partick Hill. Timber asked what is celluclay. I think I described it, but it's like... it's a bag. It's not like cheap, but I'd seen it from American places, and it's a bag, and you get a box, and it's a bag. And I think you can also now get art clay, which is similar. And basically it's paper mache. So it's just cellulose fibres, almost recycled before they've been made back into paper. And they're in little clumps. It's great for doing stuff, just fun stuff. These here, I think these were celluclay. Yeah, these here are celluclay over foil. So I use it for bark because it has this like little bit of lumpiness in it. It does shrink, so you don't want to put it onto a really solid surface. It's best to go over something where it can shrink round it, but if you make it too wet, it will shrink as it goes. In which case, if it shrunk on there, I'd just put another layer over it. But yeah, those were celluclay over foil. Pretty sure of it. Yeah, so I use it for that sort of thing, for bark and trees and things. So, Little Britain, stating the obvious. Doing that would actually make my particular problem slightly worse, that of the structures being too big in 00. Yeah, okay. Little Britain, love that spaceport diorama. I would use that prop for Traveller, the TTPRG. It is actually a Type S Traveller spaceship, so it was designed for Second Dynasty's Type S Traveller campaign that was running. That's how I met Ben at the time. So yeah, it is designed for Traveller. Stating, put the buildings in the foreground, probably not helpful. So if you have a problem, we seem to have problems, where your buildings don't look quite right, I find some buildings look underscale and some buildings look overscale. And I just tend not to now use the overscale buildings because I'm quite into my realism when I'm doing something like model railways. So what I would do is I would put the bigger ones at the front and the smaller ones as the back, which is what stating is saying. And then you get a little bit of forced perspective. And this is where playing with scale can be so powerful. If you put an N scale little barn at the back of your diorama and at the front you have a 00 scale building, you can make your 2 foot railway, model railway, whatever it is, look like there's a lot more depth than there actually is. And there's some really clever ones I've seen that have come over at Worley from the continent with forced perspective where they're actually not parallelograms, they're not even. One of my favourite was B.A. Bodil. And it had a little rail bus at the front, G-scale, came up to the bus stop. The bus stop actually rotated behind it because it was in front of it and blocked its view. And there were people on one side and no people on the other, so it would rotate round and pick people up or not pick people up and go into the building over here. And then 3 or 4 inches further back, maybe 6 inches. It was deep and it was square, but it was as deep as it was wide. A little bit further back, you'd have what comes after G, O scale. All scratch built these go that way, and then there'd be a HO one, then there'd be an N one, then there'd be a Z one, and it was like it was going up the mountain valley, in getting smaller and smaller as it went further back, and it was brilliant. It's one of my favourite ever layouts, just because it was so clever. And the smallest railway they actually had was a little Z-scale thing at the front that the kids were playing with. It was a little like toy train set that they were playing with that went round. There we go. Blasted Samaflan says, points for larger scales is that you have an easier time putting in the lights. That's true. Anything that involves electronics is easier in larger scales because obviously there's more space. But you also then need bigger batteries sometimes to move stuff. Tim says, double O would be great for the 4-foot gauge Padan Railway or Glasgow subway. Yep, they would be. I'm just thinking, I didn't know actually Glasgow had a subway, and then I'm thinking, I know what the Padan is. Hey, I had loads of pictures of it. At one point it ran from Dinorwick Quarry to Port Dinorwick, which is the layout I did. But I didn't know Glasgow had a subway. So that made me really bad that I didn't know that. Oh, and I went to Weymouth last week with my friend. I went down to visit her in Dorset. Went to Weymouth. And I walked along the front quay, and I'm sure there used to be loads of tracks embedded into the road, and I think they've retarred it and there's no tracks now, and I felt like I'd lost a bit of history. Anyway, there we go. Blasted Samaflines, just want to repost this from Digital Taxidermy. He goes on a bit more about scale and has conversion tools. Repost what? Blasted, sorry. They took them up. Oh, they did. Oh, Timber, that's such a shame. So Weymouth had a very nice ferry train. So the train ran up the quay to the ferry at the end. We parked where the ferry would have gone from. And you used to be able to see the embedded tracks still there. There's a bit of history. They've gone. That's not good. Rosen Express, G-scaling bigger is big enough to build a Raspberry Pi inside of it. Yeah, and if you're going to go with that, then you can do power on board, dead rail, whatever you want to call it, with a battery and remote control of some sort onto your trains, which is what they use for garden rail. They use remote control, which enables you to then just do a lot more stuff. I'd love to do a sci-fi train because, you know, I do a lot of sci-fi now. But I actually decided, and I think I mentioned this last time, I'd probably do a Lego base because, and that's, I don't even know what scale that is, but I do a Lego scale one for the base. So you can use the Lego there just because it's not a traditional one, and I think it's easier to get hold of. Yeah. And Ravenson, as you say, many possibilities to control crazy gimmicks. For sci-fi trains, there'd be a lot of lights and blue glowing underneath and stuff like that. But for normal trains, for those of you who don't want to go OTT, you'd definitely be able to have smoke and just sound, lights, whatever, you know, different things float your boat, really. So, 9:20. So I think I've probably really said enough about scale. You know, there's a lot to be said about scale. But I think, as I said, for me, it always comes down to what am I modelling? So much of my modelling when I was a railway was set at a certain scale, 1:87 for most of it. And I really liked ON30, which is 1:48. But now, every diorama I pick, if I run through my thought process, generally it will be, is there a kit or something that I'm using as the base for this? Is there something I've already seen that is inspiring me for this, that says it should go in a certain direction? You know, just what is it that is the start of this diorama? Quite often it's a kit. People will have a kit that they want to put into it. That might be a railway, it might be Gundam, it might be a game. Am I doing this for a game? In which case my scale's set. And once I've got that, I then decide, you know, how big the actual diorama is. You know, how much do I want to show? Is it scenery? So is it big, or is it just a small little cameo? And I move on from there. But yeah, definitely I start with what kit am I going to use, or what 3D print. And when you've got 3D prints, it becomes a lot easier to scale them up and down because you can choose then. And then it becomes, do I want this to be about a figure? Do I want this to be about scenery? Do I want this to be about weathering and detail? So I need to have a big enough canvas that actually when I put chips on, they are appropriate for the scale. I see people do, say, a Gundam, and they do a 1 to 100th scale Gundam. Now, that's about, say, it's this big, and the person goes, in the middle is about here. So that's the scale of the person. And then they go with a giant sponge and they chip around the edges. And I'm looking at it going, that chip is 6 foot wide. You know, that's a big chip. Thankfully, most people do with a fine sponge and it's not that bad. But sometimes people just over chip in the scale that they're on. And it might be because they go, oh, I'm going to use the salt technique. So they put salt on. Great technique, but it can produce really large chips. Or they go, I'm going to do hairspray, and then they over hairspray. So sometimes it's about learning to control your techniques to the level of scale. But really, I do think it's an important thing to have is the scale that you are modelling sets the level of detail you can put on it. So, yeah. Lee says, I found fake Lego train bases pretty good and the track too. I was going to 3D print the track and then use some fake Lego train bases to go with a sci-fi designed one. But what happened was I did Severna Spaceport and I wanted it to be the part 1 of like Severna the city. And Severna the city was going to have like city limits with cantinas and bars and pawn shops. It's with AW, by the way. And, you know, armory and all sorts of stuff like that. And then I was going to have sort of the sub-city, which is like the lower levels if you've played Jedi Survivor or any of these sorts of things. And then there was going to be like the retail section because someone asked for a retail sort of plaza. And Severna Spaceport didn't do that well. And I'm not sure why it didn't do that well, but it was my worst performing Kickstarter. I don't know whether I just had too much in it and it wasn't clear. I don't know if the price point was just expensive at the time, or if because it was less of a Star Wars aesthetic, it just didn't sell as well. I don't know. So it's something I need to work out before I go further into doing any more in that. But I was going to do a monorail one. And then Multiverse brought out the monorail and then he did actually the land train from Boba Fett and then brought out a really good monorail set. And I was like, can't do it. In fact, Multiverse often brings out, just before I want to do something that I want to do, so it goes on a back burner. So instead, I did Galactic Races. Right. Lego seems to be scaled between S and G, I think. G is variable, so I suspect it probably is G in the way, because S is smaller than O, so O is bigger than S, so I would say I suspect it's probably G scale, just because of the size of it. So Blasted Samurai Punch, D&D setting of Eberron has magic trains which have these glowing pyramids as the tracks. Ooh, sounds almost like a maglev. Little Britain, I put the tracks closer than the flex track standard. I trim the diverging points and achieve 48mm centre to centre. This de-accentuates the narrow gauge look a bit. Yeah, they can get quite wide otherwise. John says, Loco Remote 3D printer track works well, but the curves are very sharp and only good for short wheelbase locos, etc. Kind of wonder, yeah. I mean, it's not that hard to actually, it's not hard at all for me to make track. I actually did it. The biggest problem is making 3D print wheels, and Tim will tell you how bad my wheels were when he took my layout on and re-wheeled all of my wagons, because I did 3D print wheels and I swear they weren't round. And Tim had actually sent me them, but yeah, they weren't round, I'm sure. I also bent the axles to get them into the wagons, which didn't help. But yeah, and that's another thing about narrow gauge, you can have sharper curves, so you can just get more in. So I just trailed a little bit. I wanted to talk now about, I've talked about what I'm planning to do, the B1 Battle Droid, and I've got some dioramas to finish off. I've actually got some Bad Batch dioramas to finish as well, which I started, and there's one on the side. And I'm doing a diorama with Erin, who I do tutorials with, and we're doing the Revenge of the Sith Grievous Kenobi battle. I think I need to tweak some thing in that and then set it to print, I think, before my next call, which is in August sometime. So I probably do need to get that done as well. I'd forgotten about that because I was in Kickstarter mode. So once I've finished this week's Kickstarter and I've done my couple of weeks of that and, you know, stuff, I'm on to doing my next Kickstarter. And this is going to be fun. This is temples. So Star Wars has a lot of Jedi and Sith temples. So it will fit with the Star Wars theme. And what I want to do is, I was getting an itchy nose on live streams. I never have an itchy nose otherwise. What I want to do is have a base temple, which is, I'm going to call the Obsidian Temple, which is going to be part of the other two because it is literally the base and whatever'd mesh. And then I'm going to do a desert temple. And if you play Jedi Survivor, you'll have run around Jeddah quite a bit. So it's probably closer to Jeddah than anywhere else because that's the main desert temple. Tatooine doesn't actually have temples. So there's a desert temple. And then I'm going to do an ice one, which is similar to Ilum or Ilum. I can't remember which way you pronounce it. And do ice temples. So what I've been trying to do at the moment is procedural geometry nodes in Blender. Now, if you don't know anything about Blender, you'll have no idea what I just said. But after 2 or 3 videos, I have to say I still don't know much more than you. Geometry nodes do stuff to geometry, like mesh and curves and points. And so far, my experience of it is, watch YouTube video on this screen. On this screen, have Blender up. It goes, add a vector math box. Add a vector math box. Add a group input. Add a group input box. Change. Add a math box. Okay. Change to multiply. Change to this. Add a Voronoi. Noise texture box. Okay, put that in there. Link this to this to this. And at the end of it, you look at it and go, I've now got 55 boxes. And I'm not sure what they all do. So it's been a bit of a learning curve for me. One of the reasons I want to do it is I could hand carve ice, but I'm going to have a lot of temple to do. And if I can find a way that will randomly do ice, and actually the one I'm doing at the moment does it on a curve, but actually does a really good job of producing icicles compared to most of them that just go, I'm a cone and I'm bent a bit. Then I think it will make it a lot better to, even if I just have to draw curves on, but it will make it a lot better to have some really cool sort of icicles that are easily done. So anyway, that's what I'm working on at the moment. Wow. Done my sums for a 48 scale hanger, 6 foot in length. Wow. That's, what are you going to put in your 48 scale hanger that's 6 foot in length, Graham? That is going to be big. Timber says, have you bashed even the like button? Well, we have more likes than we've ever had concurrent viewers looking at this. So that's pretty cool. In fact, I'm amazed that we managed to get over 20 people on the night that England are playing Spain in the Euros. So I'm going to guess a lot of you might be American. But I know some of you are British and you're still here, so I'm very impressed. Thank you. And if you're in America, you probably don't follow football, and that's what the British call football. We don't call it soccer. Well, I can hear people screaming next door. There's lad next door. So have we, someone, if you're on and anybody's got the football on, do let me know if England wins, because he just sounded very excited next door. But I don't do football. So there we go. Right, have you bashed the like button? Right, for work in Blender, it should be possible to use a pen tablet for modelling. I haven't tested it yet, but it may be really helpful when it really works. I use a pen tablet, actually. I have found it very helpful. So I can tell you about my experiences of using my pen tablet and why I think you should have one if you want to sculpt for any 3D program, not just Blender. I had a Wacom Intuos whatever ages ago, and I found one of the problems with it was it didn't work with my latest Mac update years ago. So I bought a new one, And that didn't work with the Mac. And it was a brand new one, and it's supposed to work on my current Mac version. But I couldn't get it to work. So in the end, I sent it back to Amazon, and it was about 60 quid. And I bought a 25 quid XP pen. That's what it is. This is what it looks like. Get it that way around. XP pen. And I bought that, and it's worked fine. So I'm just sticking to my 25 quid XP pen one. And it works really well. And what it has that a mouse doesn't have is, apart from the fact it's easier to do sort of curvy, swishy bits and little squiggles, it has pen pressure. So when you press harder and you're sculpting in Blender, and this is using sculpt mode, you do get really good pressure. So you can go like, I'm just going to put a fine texture on. I'm going to really put texture on here. As well as changing the strength of your brushes is the other way. So it is really good. I would recommend having one if you're going to do sculpting using sculpt mold. Now, Blasted Samurai Flash, put some options for fantasy on the temples, might help for the campaign too. I think one of the things about fantasy temples is actually the temple is just a temple. I already know what the two that I'm going to do look like in my head. I don't see why you can't use them for fantasy. So, you know, I'm going to start from temples that I myself personally have seen, as well as game temples. So I've been to Egypt, so I'll be heavily inspired for the desert one by Egyptian temples with the columns, the porticos, and then the colonnades. And actually I think Jeddah in Survivor has quite a lot like that. I need to go back and just look at some of the stills from Rogue One and things. But there's definitely a lot there that's very good, you know, for fantasy, without me actually making it for fantasy. Because I'm very clear that I'm sci-fi. And I have people out there that I see as creators go from sci-fi to fantasy to sci-fi to fantasy to sci-fi to fantasy. I think, what does that do for your customer base? It's great if people outside of Star Wars can buy it, so I try not to make it too Star Wars. All right, Galactic Racers, you can't get much more Star Warsy than that. But actually, yeah, just it will work, because when you think about it, it's mostly columns, statues, porticos, colonnades, altars, flooring, all that kind of stuff. So there we go. Graham's putting his S71 Tornado, SR71 Tornado in there. That'll be nice. That'll look good. That'll look really good. Lee says I don't do football. No. Nor does Tim. Yeah, that's probably why we're here. Okay, so John says we're one down according to the BBC. Someone said to me, it was on my Discord, and I said we'll probably lose in penalties. So, you know, if we don't lose straight out, we'll lose on penalties. England never wins. It's just it's a given. We all know that. And so Graham's also doing 48. Timber, Spain 1, England 0. Oh, make that 1-1. Oh, so we just equalised. That'll be what I probably heard. So what is your favourite scale to work in, Kathy, says Bill. And yeah, zero interest in football. That's why you're all here. Someone said to me, you put it on against the final. I was like, oh, I follow football so little, I didn't realise it was actually the final. But there we go. And it's also Wimbledon men's today, so, you know, loads of finals. Bill, 1 to 48, I would say. When it comes to railways, ON30 is one of my favourites because I really love twee logging lines. When it comes to kits, or there's a lot of them in 1 to 48, so you've got variety. When it comes to game scale, 35mm is practically 1 to 48. I do them as read across, so all of the Star Wars Legion stuff fits into it. Some of the bigger stuff from Games Workshop will fit into it if you want to go that route. And I just like the balance of size for figures with ability to do vehicles and still get scenery in. But if I was doing figures, like I was doing an actual figure, like I wanted to do a Captain Rex figure and a scene and just a small bit of corridor or something, because I love Captain Rex and I love Ahsoka, and not new Ahsoka, old Ahsoka, nice Ahsoka, kind of sparky, snippy Ahsoka. Loved her. If it was there, then I'd do 1/6, because I think 6th scale is wonderful. And if I could do 6th scale for everything, I would, but realistically it'd be, you know, it'd just be too big. So I find 1 to 48 the best. So Graham says favourite scale is 32 for aircraft. I think that's a good scale as well. I can see that. Tamsin, no, Kathy's live streams are well established as the second Sunday of the month. It's UEFA who choose to conflict. Yeah, you tell UEFA off. That is funny. Yeah. And if you don't follow football and you have no idea what we're talking about, don't worry. That's why we're here. We're into modelling. The one thing I do like about 3D printing is that it is scale agnostic. So you can get things. So I get every single one that Second Dynasty has done. All of their ships, their spaceships, playable spaceships, I can scale from 28mm to 35mm. And to do that, I take the piece, I divide by 25 and I divide by 28 because it's in 28mm and I times by 35 and I work out what that is on a calculator, and then I think I actually used 125% off the top of my head because I think that's what it is. I think there's 5. Yeah. So I think it's 125%. So, and I just put that into my slicer. So I don't touch them until they're in my slicer, and I scale them up in my slicer and print them, clips and all, and it works fine. And that taking it up to 35mm, which is about 1/48. So I've had great success in making things larger. The problem with 3D printing comes when you want to go smaller. Because when you want to go smaller, if I'm doing clips, my mini clips are tweaked slightly so they still fit, but they don't fit as well when you get smaller. When I got to 15mm and I took Ben's original 28mm Type S, he actually did then take onto account all of the things that I'd done, and he made some tweaks. But actually, he had opening doors where you slid them inside the wall. I'd printed in grey resin and it was so thin I could see through them, and they just all warped like mad. And in the end I just did the exterior for the one because at 15mm I couldn't get it to print in resin, and he designed for FDM. So realistically it's easier to go bigger than smaller if you're looking for 3D prints to do. But I find a lot of Thingiverse free prints, you go in and you go, oh, this is amazing, and then you try and blow it up and you realise that it's just it hasn't got enough geometry in it. By that I mean the corners look like rather than a circle. Blasted says, I recently put my 40mm Combat Tails Trooper to 12mm scale for a war game I'm playing recently. It printed decently. That's good, but you are very good at modelling quite well for printing, so you don't have loads of little thin bits sticking out. Right, oh sorry, I missed Timber saying the best scale for detail is O gauge, but the ideal scale for maximum is a layout without getting too fiddly is TT. That's interesting. Bill says I'm Scottish, so England's performance interests me little anyway. I'm half Welsh, so I'm zero interested, to be honest. Tim says 5.5mm 1 foot 1 to 55.4 is used for narrow gauge modelling. Not tried it myself, but he has friends who uses it. That's interesting. Why would they pick that scale? Is it because is that because of the track? Anyway, that blasted summer flange, but sculpting for a certain scale range, say 12 to 15mm, you need to go to a different methodology to be effective. Yeah, you literally, I'm a very fine scale modeller. I like my people to look like people, but it makes fingers problematic. You do need to chunk them up a bit. Norm, apologies Kathy, I have to leave a little early. Good show on scale, thanks. Bye bye Timbers Digger and all in chat. See you next month. Thanks Norm, if you're actually still here. Thanks for moderating. And I will see you next month. Hopefully I'll have worked out how to take this light out of my eyes. I don't know what it did. So Graham says, Bill, same here, huh? But got English, Irish and Canadian blood in me. Well, there we go. So controversial, I model in 1 to 48 and 1 to 50 in the same diorama. That's not a problem. I would find it odd if every single person was 6 foot high and every single person was like, so if you're putting people in, you have thin people, fat people, big people, small people. So I don't really have a problem. If you're doing buildings, I would put, so 1 to 50th is smaller than 1 to 48th, so I would put them at the back. If they're a 50th, and I put 1/48th at the front. But sometimes there's 1/50th dioramas that are oversized and 1/40th that are undersized. So, I think as long as it looks good by eye, I don't think it matters. Right, so Tim's now explaining, in 5.5mm, 1 foot, 3 foot gauge is 16.5mm, and 2 foot gauge is 12 meters, so you can use 00 and TT track. Right, thank you. That makes sense. Best analogy for scale I've heard is that Kevin Hart and Dwayne Johnson are technically the same scale, but very different in size. Okay, I don't know who Kevin Hart is, but Dwayne Johnson's The Rock. Yay! Yeah, and I think Timber's right. No one could tell the difference between items in 1 to 50th and 1 to 48th. What I find is people who are doing some designs, like laser cut buildings, when they first started out, people made really chunky, I can think of one manufacturer made really chunky stuff that just looked massive in any scale. And I've bought 00 scale water towers that looked big on an S scale layout. So sometimes you just have to use your brain and put it there and just go, that looks reasonable, that doesn't. I couldn't work out what Lee meant, and he's retracted it, so hey, we'll find out in a minute. So any other questions on scale? We've got a quarter of an hour. Otherwise, I was actually going to say, on my desk, I believe that will be, that's a 12-inch figure probably, isn't it? That's 6 scale. That's my favourite figure for scale. Having something about this size, I just feel if you're going to put detail on a figure, that's the size you want it. Something nice and chunky in your hand. That's my Titanfall. Sorry, that's Titanfall 2. Which way is the? There we go. And this is one of my favourite. This is probably my favourite game. And this dude here is the main character that you play in it. So there we go. He's on my desk, along with some mini clips for some reason. Okay. Lee, I can still never comprehend The Rock was in an episode of 4. He was in the episode of 4. I didn't know that. Which episode was he in? Wow, I did not know he was in that. Seth MacFarlane was in Enterprise as an uncredited engineer just because he was such a Star Trek fan. And he said them to do, could I do a Star Trek series? And they said no. So he went off to The Orville, which is better than most Star Trek series. Certainly all the recent ones. Yes, I've seen Star Wars Prodigy. Is there more than one season? I've seen one season of it at least. Little Britain, would it be feasible to do force perspective on a ship model? If you had a destroyer in the middle of an ocean and you're doing 1 to 700 scale, I'm not sure you could. If you were doing a ship here and it's moored up and in the background you had buildings and it was like a dock scene, yes, I think you could. But not if the ship is the only model there, because I just don't think it, in my head, I don't think it would be as easy to do. You need to have distance, you see, and a ship doesn't, because you can normally look at all sides of a diorama, unless you forced it that you were looking at the front down. I think it'd be really hard to do, is the short answer. I think you could feasibly do it if you were 3D printing it. You were looking at it from the nose and it's really long and you made the back smaller in 3D print, sort of in some kind of scaling, but I'm not sure. But if you were doing like a dock scene and you've got a ship at the front and buildings behind, definitely, yeah. Tim says the German Siku model company produced most of its die-cast cars vehicles in 1 to 55. Yeah, and actually I did an S-scale diorama And the main thing that made it S scale when I was choosing the scale, and I say it's often about the kit, was I had a Hot Toys Warthog for, it was a Halo diorama. And the Hot Toys Warthog is 1:64. So everything else got put around it, 1:64, because that was the Warthog that I had. And I didn't want to 3D print it when I could just buy one cheaply. So it's for a trawler moored end on in a dock, says Little Britain. Thanks, Timber, on the scores. I think you probably could, if it's a trawler moored end on, do the dock behind it at a different scale, but I think the trawler would look better in the same scale. But I'd have to see it. Seth MacFarlane was also in an episode of Seinfeld. The Rock was in the 6th episode. Sunkatsu is basically a wrestling episode. I remember that, and that one's got the armour, isn't it? Has it got Riker? Oh, I thought that was with Riker and learning something. I must be thinking of a different one. Okay. Yeah, well, it would be a wrestling episode. I'm going to have to go back and look. So, there we go. Right. So, other things then. Ooh, what should I talk about? I've got 12 minutes to fill. Ooh, what will be of interest? I don't want to talk about football. Let's talk about force perspective then, as people have been mentioning it. So, I think there's many ways you can force perspective. And one of the key ones is scale. It's really important to think about actually scaling. But another way you can force perspective is detail. So I've talked a lot about I detail bigger figures more. So if I'm doing terrain, it's not that detailed because it's going to be on a tabletop. But if I'm doing a diorama that's to be looked at a lot, I'll detail it more. And I like to detail smaller areas a lot, and larger ones I do less detail. But if you're doing a railway or a diorama and you want to force perspective, one really good way is if it's only looked at from the front, which is quite often what you do. If it's a handed one, which railways almost always are, but dioramas aren't always, what you can do is make the front really detailed. So all your expensive 3D print, scanned models of people that you've got from Model U, they can go on the front. And all of the extra sort of leaves, the scale leaves, the laser cut plants, all of that you can put on the front. When you go further back, you could start losing the detail levels. So suddenly the trees perhaps don't have individual leaves. They may have ground foam that's got a more massed effect. Because when I look down the garden, I can see the leaves individually on the tree that's right outside my window. It's pitch black, so I can't see them all, so I'm imagining this. And I can actually see the bamboo leaves quite well. And they're 60 foot away. But by the time I look to the trees in the background, that are really far in the background, in neighbours' gardens, I can't really see leaves at all. They're just green with a sort of texture that isn't leafy. It's just green with sort of bits to it. You can employ that same technique. So you can also make more weathering on the front, more details, just everything that then draws the eye to the front of the diorama and to the centre of it. And then the eye looks back and goes, yeah, well, I wouldn't expect to see as much there because it's blurred with distance. And you can make the eye feel that it's been blurred because it's distant. That's one way as well, of forcing perspective as well as scale. I've been asked a random question. If you were to make terrain using a known architectural style, i.e. brutalism or Gothic, what would you choose? I am not a fan of Warhammer aesthetic, and I think Gothic goes far too much towards the Warhammer. So for what I do, which is sci-fi, I would do brutalism, and I would always choose, I prefer classic sci-fi to, by that I mean sort of clean lines. I like Starfield sci-fi, for example, and I like sort of NASA plus, the stuff that we have now. But I wouldn't, I'm not a fan of like stylized Gothic, futuristic stuff. And because I model in the sci-fi arena, I'm like, yeah, I could do a Gothic window. and I quite enjoy it, and I'd love to do a medieval town and stuff like that. But actually, my preferred architectural style would be more lived in, sort of NASA chic. I'd like my habitats to be clean and white with coloured stripes rather than doing a Gothic thing with skulls everywhere. Sunkatse. Thank you, Bill. Yeah, don't worry. I mistype all the time. And then it changes it. And I'm like, I'm sure I know how to spell there. And then I watch it and it changes it. So was J.G. Hertzler. Was he in that episode? I like J.G. Hertzler. He was Martok, wasn't he? Not Martok. Maybe Martok. Did you see that about bamboo being the new Japanese knotweed growing into people's homes? I didn't see it. It doesn't surprise me. I have bamboo in my garden. Before you all panic, mine's in a raised bed. It's stone walled in effectively and rendered, and it's in a raised bed. So it's 3 foot off the ground. And it can't spread out the bed. It really can't. And it's been in there 10, 15 years and it hasn't spread out the bed. So, yeah, it's fine. But I can believe it because someone was telling me they'd planted bamboo, it's my gardener, and it had gone under his neighbour's concrete shed base and come up the other side. So, yeah. Jeffrey Combs is another great one. He was Weyoun. That's all Deep Space Nine, though. That's not Voyager. That's what I'm knowing these people from. But yeah, once you put loads of prosthetics on people, then you really can't tell them. And the prosthetics people who have to sit through 5 hours of prosthetics. Oh, actually, 6 minutes left. Who's been watching The Acolyte? Oh, watching the comments on The Acolyte is so much fun. It is full of people who hate The Acolyte, who are just so funny. I look at it going, yeah, that's not right. Yeah, but that didn't really happen like that. So yeah, anyway, if you haven't watched The Acolyte, well, it's the latest Star Wars. I don't dislike it. I actually quite like it. And I don't think it deserves the hate that it's getting. But literally, it got hate bombed. So before it even came out, it had almost like a 14 rating on Rotten Tomatoes with 1 star, and it hadn't even been out yet. So people hadn't even seen it. J.G. Hertzler was in loads of episodes. He was. The Blasted Samouflage says Jeffrey Combs is in every Star Trek episode. He's that talented. He is. You just don't know what he is. Tamsin's saying, I'm guessing from the whoops I can hear from the neighbour that Sane scored or it's all over. Bill says he fought 7 and 9 in Sunkatse. Yep. Lee says, I think there's an episode of DS9 where we play 3 characters. Oh, Spain won. I'm not surprised. I'm not upset either. Yeah. Yes, Lee says he can't wait for more Strange New Worlds. I really like Strange New Worlds. I miss episodic TV, Monster of the Week. What I'm finding more and more with streaming is people think that TV now has to be interconnected like Marvel. You saw it a bit on Discovery. You see it on all the new Star Wars stuff. Ahsoka especially. I think this one was always a bit different, The Acolyte. It was never meant to be, but I wanted Ahsoka to be Monster of the Week. Here she comes, here's your younger sidekick. We go off and do some Jedi stuff next episode. Instead, it's Rebels Season 6 or 5, or whichever one it is, and it just seems to be a continuation of a story that started in animation, which I've seen twice, so it's fine, and then carries on. And what I really want to see is episodic sort of adventure, and I'm just not seeing it. So one of my worries is that this trend towards episodic, apparently it's because streaming, people tend to binge watch, or they can binge watch, whereas broadcast, they had to allow that people would miss episodes, so they couldn't make it so much of a mini-series as these are. But I just kind of miss this whole streaming people, that everything now is, because you watch them, you don't miss one. But I just miss it, Adventure of the Week type stuff. It's what I grew up on. Every TV show was that for my entire whatever until about 5 years ago. And now they're all Marvel, MCU. Everything has to be linked. Yay. that's my little piece on it. So Lee says, yep, episode is good. I also like that it's got sense of wonder of TOS, but with modern production values. That was very good. Yeah, I like the episodic ones. Like Strange New Worlds is much more episodic. Though they have, you know, got some things that go through. And suddenly we gained a few more viewers now the football's over. So welcome. It's about to finish, but welcome. You can go back and watch it. And don't worry, if you watch the football, I'm sure you'll get over it. So there we go. So just one thing about the Acolyte. It has got some great costumes and design aesthetics, and it was all done with models. So all of the ships in it are models. It's all set location. It's not done on the volume. So when you see the Jedi ships, those are actual models. So for anybody interested in modelling, I think if an art book or something comes out, or they do a making of program of it, it will be worth watching. Because I was chatting to one of the cameramen when I lent him some terrain for a photo shoot he was doing. I lent him my lava stuff. And very clearly, you know, and he showed me a couple of pictures early, which I haven't seen because obviously it's sworn to secrecy. But, you know, it was filmed on location with big models sat in location. And, you know, he was just saying what a difference it makes. So, you know, that was a proper old-fashioned production house thing with sets. And, you know, obviously there's some CGI, but with sets and models. So that should be interesting to see how they did it. Bill says, JG Hertz Lepeja Erosion in Sunkatsi. That one, yeah, that was a really good one. That was a very good episode. So Bill's catching up on comments. I play catch up on comments all the time. I wouldn't worry about it. So we've talked about scale. So to sum up, I like real scales where there's numbers. I was an accountant for many years. I did a maths A level. I can cope with real numbers. I like 1/48 or 1.48. I can cope with that. I know exactly what to do with that. I don't like 35mm. O, when O is different in every country you go to, it seems like. 35mm, where different companies might have different sizes for 35mm. They were actually 32 and 28 seemed the worst offenders for that, because there's not many games in 35mm other than Legion. And I'd really get confused by just some of the ways things work. I mean, I put Gunpla up there. They are very consistent, at least in their scales. So if you get confused by scale, don't worry. It is confusing. Model railways are confusing. Games are confusing. If you absolutely want to know what something is, convert it into numbers, and then you know what you're doing. And work out what the number should be for your scale, and always use that if you're trying to model from scratch. So that is my thing for scale. And pick your scale by your detail level. Do you want big scenery? Do you want to be able to do weathering, close-ups and details? If you want to do fabric, go big. If you want to do loads of greenery and trains running through a landscape, go perhaps smaller, unless you've got a mansion. So that's it. That was it. You don't need to watch it now. That's what the live stream was. So there we go. We got to 10 o'clock. We talked about scale. I did a PowerPoint. Didn't do any spreadsheets, sorry, Timber. And we are done. So thank you, everybody, for coming. Sorry about the whole, it didn't quite work at the beginning. I still have the blinding light in my eyes, which is gross. And I'll try and sort it for next time. And I will see you all in August, when I think we're going to talk about weathering. I just thought that was a good topic. So I'll pick out some stuff and we'll talk about that. So guys, thank you ever so much for being here, and I will see you in a month's time.